right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for coming. Sorry we're a little bit late. We're just having a little nauseous here. Call meeting to order. And approval of the agenda. Anybody have any issues? Anybody else have anything they'd like to add or? Okay. There's just the one late item.
Maureen is.
Oh, sorry, Maureen.
I wonder, could we pull 12.6 into the correspondence?
Not quite there yet, but. Oh, 12.6 in correspondence,
Yeah,
sorry.
just move it over.
Sure can. Okay. Anything else? Okay, move to approve, please. Okay, I got Maureen and Sue Ellen as a second, and all in favor? Thank you. Is there public comments? Anybody want to chat with us?
We have one this evening, Bill Granger,
Oh,
regarding
great.
bin loan authorization bylaw for Kobe water system.
Great. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you. Don't mind if I sit down?
Please do.
Oh,
That's
okay.
right.
Really comfortable.
That's what it's here for. We prefer it.
So, good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council, staff. Thank you for the time to speak to this. I did send an email, I think got to you. I'm sure I'm not the first person that said this. It's very difficult to get agendas late on Thursday and get a response together in a timely manner. So I did it as quickly as possible. I did meet with, it was of course a two-agenda matter. You discussed it 2 weeks ago at council. And I met with some neighbors in the interim. And so my comments are kind of an amalgam of what I and my neighbors think might be helpful suggestions, certainly some concern as well. I did make a little math error, and I did it in the back of an envelope, and so I went high with one and low with the other. I mistakenly said that we were paying $1.99 per cubic meter of water used all of our 408 allocations. It's actually $1.59, but it's still a lot of money per cubic meter, and it's still more than the reduced rate that all the users that go over the 400 meters pay. They pay $1.10. To verify that, I went to the Bowen Island Municipal website and looked at the new, just updated a couple of weeks ago, Kobe water system page. And that's true. If you go over 400 cubic meters, 408 cubic meters, you pay less. There's no conservation incentive at all. So this isn't, I really appreciate the work of staff. I appreciate the work of the Public Advisory Committee working on our behalf on the Kobe water system. The folks with me tonight don't want to speak, but they're my neighbors and my friends. We're actually all the weed warriors. We meet sometimes on Saturdays and pull weeds in local parks around Bowen Island. And while we're working, we discuss all kinds of things. And over the years, the water system long-time capital needs of the municipality, but there wasn't any listing of reserves, so finally it's here, I copied it off. And there are a couple of reserves at the end of this discussion that I'm going to suggest as alternatives. The proposal that's before you tonight is that the users repay the loan that's required to build the Cove Bay water system at this point. And I've broken down the numbers. I went low on the amount per usage. I went low on that amount. Our actual Cove Bay payments to the municipality, assuming $615 for 640 connections, is almost $400,000 a year in water fees. And looking again at the 2018 financial report, that's the bulk of the water fees that come into the municipality. I know that we're the biggest water system. Part of the 2018 financial report broke out how many water systems there are, 7. Some have only 41 users. We have somewhere over 600. Our water system stretches all the way from the top of Valhalla, so almost, probably Timber Groves has some water users from Jason. I know a few have bought into the system and paid extra, but certainly all the Miller's Landing, all the way to the water in both directions, is on the Cove Bay water system, and of course all of Beach Hill. All the commercial operators in the Cove, I did this with one of my neighbors. If you walk up Government Trunk Road and count the meters, there aren't nearly as many meters as there are buildings, so some of them have shared meters for shared uses. There are some big water users down there, and part of Mr. Hayre's report indicated that when staff speak to people that go over their 408 meter allocation, they're happy to pay the extra, and I'm sure they are, because they're actually getting a much better deal than paying the full rate. And they have no choice anyway. You've got to use the water, they have commercial fees. Interestingly, Mr. Mayor, you and I were at the ball game last Thursday night. You didn't know I was on somebody's private stadium.
Very nice.
Out of the woods, very nice. And as soon as the game was over, the Diggers won, by the way, which was fantastic. As soon as the game was over, the sprinklers came on, which is good. You know, they're being careful about watering that lawn. On the way over here, I walked across the school field. It is sprinklered, obviously, it's still green, but again, they're being very careful about the use. The worst thing that could happen to the Cove Bay water users, obviously, is not to have water, not to have clean potable water, and not to have water generally. So, together, I think we have to figure out our way through this. I think, my neighbors think, that it's really unfair to ask the existing users to pay the entire cost of the loan that is required at this point to build the water treatment. Not this council, but previous to this council, 4 years ago, or now almost 5 years ago, this was an election issue. Every candidate was asked what they thought about sharing the cost of Cove Bay. You may remember at the school this question came up. And there was kind of general understanding that Cove Bay water system serves more than just the residential users, particularly in the Cove. 2 schools, 3 churches, the seniors, not necessarily seniors, but the housing co-op, every multiple housing dwelling, I think, that's on Bowen Island is within the Cove Bay water system. Altera was probably the most recent one that was added, but they were dealt with, I think, pretty fairly. Each unit is metered and billed individually. But that hasn't been true in the past. I'm sure if you looked at the multiple housing just down the hill here, it's on 1 meter. There's others that are also on 1 meter. So they, I'm sure, go far over their allocation and they pay the additional cost. So I think that needs to be looked at. The last time out at the public information session 5 years ago, we did discuss that, and the Public Advisory Committee at the time thought that needed to be looked at. But in the fullness of time, the new bylaw that is referred to on the website was passed in 2016, and that's where we got the $1.10 figure from. So it really wasn't dealt with adequately. The last thing I want to say, I guess, is that I would suggest, it's great to have the reserves finally there and a list in front of me to look at. I would suggest that but council, Mr. Hayre's recommendation has alternatives in it. First is to go with the report as presented. The second is to look at alternative financing. I suggest we please do that. The 2018 annual surplus might be one place to look for part of the funding. There's over $2 million there in 2018 in the annual surplus. The portfolio investments, there is apparently cash sitting at First Credit Union, $3,220,000. And there is a water fund capital amount, which at the end of 2018 had $324,000 in it. And finally, there's the capital replacement and renewal fund. There is a water treatment plant right now at the edge of Trout, Grafton Lake. I think it wouldn't be too big a stretch to suggest that some of that is a replacement when we build a new water treatment plant there. So those are sources that I would suggest to take a look at. I made the point in my memo to you that many of us in my community, and by extension my community, I belong to the United Church, so I talk to people, of course, from many other parts of the Cove Bay water system, and we're all pretty much of a mind. We don't want to be paying the future costs of a water system for expansion. We think that that can be covered at some future time when the expansion plans come forward. Again, Mr. Hayre's report mentioned that there is one development proposal that has been filed that will rely on the Cove Bay water system just around the hill here. So we're hoping you'll take a look at it and fair to all of us. And I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Bill.
Thank you. You got a copy of that, folks? I'd like to get it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dee and Moyer, for coming with us.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to move on to the consent agenda. Does anybody have issues?
I'd like to pull 3.4 and 3.6.
4, 3.6. Oh, okay.
One is 3.9, please.
Sure.
Then Tina Olson.
Yes, that was good. Okay, so 3.9. Do we have an agenda from here?
Oh, yes.
We also have the addition of a recommendation regarding the multi-use path. Add to our agenda. We can put that under new business, or business arising, we can add that in as 9.2. Well, I just like to deal with the library also.
Yeah.
And the rest can go under.
Okay, where's that?
That's good.
That's what I was looking for.
Well, we don't really have a category.
Oh,
so
okay.
that's good. No, we're talking library. So it'll be business and right between 4 and 5.
Yeah.
So can you tell me where you're putting things?
Okay, so we're putting the library operating agreement, it'll be 4.3, although it's not a
Right,
delegation.
putting it
put
in
it
there. Okay.
The other items, 9.2 will be the release of the recommendation regarding the multi-use path.
Right,
And the other two items will be under section 11, items removed from the
right,
consent.
there it
agenda.
is, thank you. 6.
All right. Okay, the council, the recommendation is council approve the items as outlined July 8th, 2019 consent agenda as amended. And we move that, thanks Rob, and use David, all in favor. Thank you. All right. Move on to delegations. Hayre. Trust area services, read public engagement of Bowen Island for Islands 2050. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
Yeah.
So thank you. You've got a letter in your agenda package today, and I prepared a short PowerPoint just to give you a brief overview of what I'd like to talk to you about tonight. So the project I'm here to speak to you about is Islands 2050, the future of the trust area. This is a public engagement program that Islands Trust Council is undertaking throughout the Federation, so on each island or each local trust area. So I'm here today to talk to you about what your preferences might be for Bowen. But before we get into the detail, I thought I'd just quickly run you through what is the policy statement and how it relates to Bowen Island. I think this should be a refresher for all of you, but just thought we'd take a minute. So the Islands 2050 project is focused on an update to the policy statement. Just as a refresher, this is a key cog for Islands Trust. So we have the Act, which specifies our legislative mandate and the legal structure of Islands Trust. The policy statement is where all the policy direction comes from, and it's used to inform the development of official community plans, land use bylaws, as well as advocacy positions of the Islands Trust Council. And then, of course, the strategic plan is founded in the policy statement. So everything falls into alignment back into this document. It is a fairly dated document. The last substantial amendments were in the late 90s. So it's losing some relevance, I would suggest. We have some graphics here I just thought I'd bring on screen that nicely show that the policy statement acts in a way that's akin to a regional growth strategy in some other regions. We have the policy statement, which informs the development of the OCP, which informs the development of zoning bylaws, which then really informs the landscape of your island. And so just thought we'd show you that. And of course, this is true from all regions. We have different graphics that can portray how this works on shorelines, agricultural areas, residential areas, etc. Again, this just shows that there's this sequencing. All land use bylaws through your OCP are reviewed by the Islands Trust Executive Committee for compliance, and then all of it has to be consistent with the Islands Trust Act. So just as a very quick overview, this document, particularly in the introduction, includes the guiding principles of Trust Council, so how the council is informed for decision making, and the principles that guide all of the work. It is set out in three main goals. The first is ecosystem protection, stewardship of resources, and healthy and sustainable communities. Those three areas have policy direction within each of those that guide your official community plan development. And then there's three types of policies, as I outlined earlier: commitments, directives, and recommendations. 1 and 3 are the advocacy statements that range from everything such as prohibiting casinos, is an example of a commitment. A recommendation might be something along the lines of any of the advocacy work that we do, from ALR recommendations through to, for example,
Trans Mountain Pipeline.
yeah, Trans Mountain Pipeline, oil spills, that sorts of things. And the directives are the ones that inform the land use work. So what we're undertaking through the Islands Trust Council and an adopted engagement plan through the Executive Committee is an engagement program this year, and particularly out in community this fall, to achieve a number of objectives. And I'll just quickly walk you through what those are. They are outlined in the letter we sent you. The first objective is the overarching one, which is to undertake sufficient engagement so as to inform a final adoption by Trust Council of a bylaw that amends the introduction, parts 1, 2, and Schedule 1 definitions of the policy statement, so that we have up-to-date information, improved understanding of history and acknowledgement of First Nations, and an increasing recognition of the impacts of climate change. Those are the overarching goals. We'd also like to go out to the public, because it's been quite a long time since we've done so, to help people understand the content and function of the Islands Trust Policy Statement. We'd also like to increase awareness and knowledge about the Islands Trust generally and its mandate. We'd like to promote understanding of reconciliation and Trust Council's reconciliation declaration that they made in March, and the history of First Nations in this region. In addition, we'd like to use this to develop stronger relationships with First Nations. At the same time that we'll be out engaging with community, we're doing a parallel stream of engaging with all 30 First Nations in the Trust area. We are interested in seeking input on the long-term visions for the Trust area at the Federation-wide level, so across the region, looking to hear from constituents what are their hopes, concerns, and what do they see as the opportunities. A primary exercise as well is if we are undertaking a fairly limited scope at this point. We're trying to limit the scope so that we can inform future amendment processes when we get into more detail in parts 3, 4, and 5 of the policy statement, where we might consider additional work at looking at directive policies. At this point, there's been a lack of experience with it in the last 20 years, so we're going to gain some experience. And the 8th one came out of March Council, where they broadened the scope a little bit to create more awareness about potential impacts of climate change and opportunities for mitigation, resilience, and adaptation policies. So there might be a little bit more deep policy work in the area of climate change, and then we ideally will limit the scope beyond that until future phases. But we'll see what we hear from First Nations. We'll certainly be responsive to strong concerns that come forward. Public engagement options that we're here to hear from you today as to what are your preferences and recommendations. The first is that we are, the 4 options we're bringing to you to get feedback on, and we've been in conversation with Sophie on your staff around what might work for Bowen. We can do a community drop-in and open space. This is going to feature information boards and explore each of the major themes that we hope to bring forward. People can come in, talk to us, and then we're hoping to have sort of a World Cafe discussion. The second is a vision booth. This would be sort of a kit that we would take out to community markets or events, and we can also host it on BC ferry routes to catch people as they're going about their travels. The third is an online survey and dedicated email address. We really see this as a core way of collecting concerns from everyone, regardless of whether they also attend in-person events. And the fourth is to collaborate with schools and youth organizations to seek input from youth. So I'm here today to ask you, what do you think is right for Bowen? What are the fits? We intend to come ideally between September and November would be the ideal timing for us, and we'd be also going to all other local trust areas throughout the trust area in that time frame. So a little bit of a roadshow for us. So with that, are there any questions?
Thanks, Claire. Allison?
So anybody's going to be able to fill out the survey?
Yes.
So if we chose the general open house or whatever, it doesn't mean we're good, okay. I'm thinking because Trust Council is meeting here in September, that would be either the weekend, you know, before or after, somehow in conjunction with that would maybe make sense.
Okay, thank you.
Our community event, big one is Bowfest, and then I don't know if the farmers markets. Yeah, there isn't much. The Bowfest is second to last weekend in August, the weekend before.
Last Saturday.
Yeah, the Saturday before Labor Day weekend, so
Okay, yes.
that's at the beginning of your time frame, and that's a big community event, which gets,
Thank you.
as to whether it's the open house or the vision session. I think there's a lot of people that would probably do both, but wouldn't do the World Cafe part of the open house.
So,
Just that, I think the farmer's market usually goes into the fall, and I remember that with the transportation plan and the parks plan, and Applefest, yeah.
Which is October, the timing might work out this Sunday of the Thanksgiving weekend.
Yeah, so there's a few options there. Farmer's market is every Saturday, I think, until around Thanksgiving, and then Applefest. So those would be a chance to be, I forget what you call it, but when you're at a table and you're at a community event. I think
That's the vision booth.
Vision booth. The I may have heard that we've got permission to ride on the ferries.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. So if that's the case, then that would be a way to catch people who don't come to community events. The commuters and people who don't have a lot of time to come to community stuff, some of those commuter runs might be good. You could catch the high school students on them too.
Okay.
And that's the main thing. I think the online survey will be good for everybody. But I think for the part about making people aware of what the Islands Trust is, the being at a community event, whether it's the farmers market or Apple Fest,
What about
Would
Bow
be good.
Fest or something like
Well, that's what I thought.
it's a little early, that's trouble.
that? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Certainly our community center steering group did a lot of sessions on the ferry, and they found that a great way to
Very good.
disseminate
Okay, that's great to hear.
information. Yeah.
Maureen?
I'm curious about the timeline for the rest of this. This is looking at part 1 and 2 of the policy statement. What's the time frame for the remainder?
So what we're looking at right now is, and it will very much depend on feedback we get from First Nations and how that timing looks. In a perfect world, we would be heading towards bringing something to first reading to council in May of next year. But we'll see how those conversations go and how in depth they go with community and First Nations. We would then look at putting in a budget proposal potentially for the following fiscal year to look at opening up all of the document for review. I think it will depend on what we hear this phase as to how comprehensive that looks and what the engagement methods would look like for that. But that's our intent at this point.
And looking at it further to get approval for moving forward, is that from the ministry?
Yeah, so it would go for first reading, then we have to refer it out to 100 referral agencies, which includes First Nations, improvement districts, all the local trust committees yourselves, school districts. We have a broad range of stakeholders that it would need to go to, and First Nations for the more formal referral process. Once we've received all of that feedback in, we'll make any necessary amendments, bring it to council for second and third reading. It would then go to the minister, where we understand it takes about 6 months, that process. But again, we're trying to get the rusty machinery moving again, because it's been quite some time since everyone's done this. So we anticipate 6 months. We would then get it back, and council could do fourth reading.
Okay. And just one last question, Claire. You said, I can't quite remember the wording, that there were some parts of it that were out of date, or from your perspective, what are they?
Oh, so I would suggest the references to First Nations are inappropriate and really need amending to be consistent with our reconciliation commitments and to be factually correct. Also, there's no reference to climate change in the document at all. There's also some pieces where it has a context statement that sort of talks about the future as being 2020. So we'd like to be more forward-looking than that. There's also just some pieces in the policy statement that are relevant to our communities today, so things like oil spills, which is taking up a great deal of council's time and energy around responding to, but those words are not really mentioned in the document. So there might be an opportunity to hear from community about what are their values today, what are the areas where they're really concerned, and we'd be able to incorporate some of that into the document. This phase, as I said, is primarily focused on the introduction, but if there are very strong themes that emerge from community, we're certainly going to be bringing that to council for their consideration. And council has given us direction really to look at climate policies and inform the update with a big focus on climate and how the Islands Trust Council can make the document more relevant and modern.
Thank you.
Michael?
Claire, a couple of questions if I may. I
Sure.
welcome by the way.
Thank you.
The timing you've given us, because that was one of my questions, knowing that what is on our municipal staff's workload,
Mhm.
is it safe to presume that you won't be needing their time to assist with this? This will be something that you'll be doing totally independently and you won't need to draw on any of their resources?
I think that's generally fair. I think as we plan the engagements, we would be coordinating with your staff to make sure we're not bumping into other major activities going on in the island.
Yeah.
And it may be that your communication coordinator might like to come out and help represent both together, but I think that would be at the discretion of your staff to see if that's of value or not.
Claire, the cost of this road show is $45,000. Have you included your staff costs and staff time within that $45,000?
No, staff time's not included, but our overtime budget is, but regular staff time is not included in that budget.
Do you have even the vaguest idea as to hours? I'm not trying to pin you down, but I mean, at 45,000, you're covering an awful lot of territory here. I don't know how many people you're being mobilised for this, but I just wondered whether you had any thoughts of how many people hours, maybe said man hours, people hours you've got there, you'll be mobilising?
We haven't yet estimated that because of course we're still going out to each local area, asking them what their needs and concerns are and what opportunities they'd like. So whether it's 1 engagement per region or 4 will really inform what that staff time looks like. So once we've been out and heard from all jurisdictions, I would then be in a better position to answer that because we'll know the extent of the engagement that's required.
And finally, I presume that you'll be putting out further information on sort of costs and benefits, because I've been speaking to 2 sets of long-term trustees from different islands, and they've indicated to me that they've put the engagement on hold because they're actually seeking further information on costs and benefits.
I have not had that request specifically from any local trust committee that I'm aware of. So far, each local trust committee has asked us to come down. Some have asked for limited engagement, and others have asked for a robust set of engagement, but I haven't had any specific requirements as to cost. We will be, once we've heard from all jurisdictions and we've put together the full engagement schedule, we will be reporting back to the executive committee with a full plan, and that will include a proposed budget.
Okay, and will trustees get a copy of that proposed plan?
Certainly they could. It will be in the public agenda package for the executive committee.
Okay, it's thematic, yeah.
But yeah, certainly that can be available.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Thank you very much.
Yes.
David?
Thanks, Gary. Thank you for this, Claire. So you're asking for our opinion as to which of the options
Yes, and
for engagement?
Any combination
And
of
so,
them.
yeah, I mean, it seems to me you're trying to do 2 things. One is you're providing information, and the other is you're trying to obtain considered opinion.
Yes,
And the latter is much harder to do.
yes.
And you know, I worry about online surveys. The TransLink one they're doing right now, they want you to watch a video before you then start answering questions, so that you actually have some information and there's an opportunity for consideration. Of your options here, I was most interested in the World Cafe approach, because that's when people actually have to sit down and talk to other people,
Yes.
and then come to some ideas. But the way you described it here, it was sort of a drop-in kind of thing, and it really won't work that way. You have to have, you know, a bunch of time where you give a presentation, or there are boards, and then you have the discussions, and you work your way around the room.
Yeah, so for the World Cafe session, the way we're intending it, and we've done a pilot with our staff to sort of
Yeah.
see how it would work, is we would have an open house that anyone could come by, look at the storyboards, talk to us, pick up the link for the online survey, stay if they wish, and if they choose to stay, can then participate in the World Cafe in a way that's informed by the information they've just seen. So it would be both, but we would certainly encourage people to come to the open house, meet us, informally ask their questions, and those who wish to go deeper can stay and participate in the World Cafe with us.
Okay.
Again, open to your feedback.
Yeah.
Again, what is the experience of Bowen? What are people used to receiving? How do they like to communicate? All of that will help us design something that works here.
I guess my personal experience with getting public engagement and considered opinion is a cafe type approach where you have people in a room for a fair while is the best approach. But it's difficult to do, and everybody's busy, it'll have to be on a weekend, and who knows whether you can get enough people and so on.
Time of year, everything else.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, the ferry, for
Yeah.
display, I mean, you've got a captive
Yeah.
audience for
Yeah.
20 minutes,
Yeah.
and if you ride, you know, 4 or 5 or 6 round trips,
Yeah.
so you get everybody coming and going in the afternoon, all the commuters, you know. Trouble is you miss the people that take Peter's bus.
Yeah.
Maybe you could ride Peter's bus. But the other, the World Cafe only appeals to a certain
Yeah.
group of people, so. But I like your idea, if you're gonna do the World Cafe, you've got the open house first for those that just want to look and kick the tires, but they don't want to actually sit down and do the test drive.
Good.
I think I would concur.
I think we might want all 3.
Yeah.
And,
Well, we have bits and
right?
pieces of both.
I think including, you know, the vision booth or whatever you're calling it on the ferry and at least one event.
Okay.
And the open house with the group cafe to follow, perhaps a couple of weeks later, something like, you know, later in the fall, as your schedule.
Could I just add a bit more about the World Cafe? My worry about this is, if you get just the people who really care talking and the people with the loudest voices talking, then you just get a certain slice of things. The advantage of a World Cafe is people have to move from table to table. And so the loud voices, you know, have other loud voices to deal with. And it's just a better way of getting considered thoughtful views.
As long as people will participate.
I know, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've had them participate in transportation plans and all kinds of good things.
Kathy?
Yeah.
That's it.
Claire, I think one of the items you were going to speak to was how a changed policy statement would impact bin bylaws.
Sure, I'm happy to speak to that. So, if we, in any round, whether it's this phase or future phases, amend a directive policy in the Islands Trust policy statement, it will, at some point, when you update your official community plan, you would be asked to incorporate or address that new directive policy. So, for example, if we were to include a new climate policy such as setback from the sea, if your official community plan didn't already include something like that, when you did your next update, you would be asked to look at that, address it in your official community plan, to then be compliant with the policy statement moving forward. So any changes that come about through the policy statement could affect your official community plan in the future. Again, the scope of that will depend on what we hear from community and what Trust Council ultimately chooses to put in the draft bylaw that goes to the minister, and of course what the minister agrees to put in the final bylaw.
Thank you, Claire.
Sorry, Peter. Sorry, I seem to be stumbling on about the money, which is really rather jaundiced of me, but given this as a la carte approach to what one community might pick, how are you billing this out? Are you billing it out on the amount of resources and the types of approach used? That's one question. So one island's election to approach it one way will give it a certain bill. Another island's election to approach it another way will give it a different level of charging. And the funds are coming from?
Okay, so I'll start at the big picture. This is a project of council, so it's been allocated a project funding. It is supported potentially as needed by communication products because we need to update some of this communication work anyway around core messaging. Each island is being asked to provide just the kind of input they're providing now. It will be scaled by population, so an island of 200 people is not going to be given the same level of engagement as an island of 3 or 10,000. So we're scaling the number of opportunities to population generally. Again, there's some customization needed, but that's our general rule of thumb that we're using.
And the budget is trust area services?
And the budget is trust area services. Well, trust area services, so it's being billed as a federation project, so Bowen would have a 1/13 of the slice of that as a council project. We're certainly interested in coming to Bowen and raising the profile and understanding of Islands Trust here, so we're certainly interested in having a presence on Bowen and doing what you deem is required to be prudent and advisable.
Yeah, Maureen?
I'm not sure if what I'm going to say is going to be helpful, so feel free to let it go in one ear and out the other. I have concerns about separating off the first two parts of the policy statement from the remainder, the ecosystem stewardship, sustainable communities, because in some respects it's, and maybe I'm wrong here, but in some respects it's the latter part that gives, the latter parts that give substance to what's talked about in the earlier sections, which are really quite dry and might only appeal to people who are dead keen on policy, whereas the reality of the policy implications become much clearer in the third, fourth, and fifth. So I guess just my comment is, I think there may be harm in looking at them discreetly. I can understand why you would do that in terms of managing a project and so on, but keeping them too firmly apart I don't think will be helpful in the engagement process, and I don't think people will get as engaged if we're not talking about ecosystems and stewardship and sustainable communities.
So I've certainly heard that concern from other trustees, and it's certainly an active topic of discussion right now at the Islands Trust Council table. At this point, we're proceeding as per the adopted engagement plan. Of course, nothing would be out of scope. We're going to hear all feedback that comes, and we're going to take it all to council. It would be up to council ultimately to decide what amendments they would like to the document. Due to the limited budget of the project, we had proposed limiting the scope, and also just to get all the referral agencies used to the document before we ask everyone to do a very deep dive into the implications of changing multiple policies. But certainly we're having that concern raised. At this point, of course, as we talk with First Nations and the public, nothing is off the table. We were certainly as staff proposing that to scope the project in an affordable way and gain experience with all of this before we engage 100 referral agencies. We'd sort of do this warm-up round. But we already keep what's called a topic review inventory, where we can keep a multi-page list of topics that have been requested over time to be amended and looked at. We would be just adding to that document and keeping it. There is certainly an active discussion right now about whether or not the project should be more full in scope. I think for this point, when we go out with the community, it wouldn't materially change too much because we're just going to be hearing people's feedback. But I can convey that back to the executive committee, certainly, as a concern.
Thank you.
If I may say, that was a subject of a very robust discussion. And I was one of the people who said, no, I take Councillor Nicholson's point on this. And I understand why you've done it, and your explanation's first class. But I'm glad it's still a matter of discussion and hasn't just been, the rubber stamped to it and then filed under paperclip and gone through the prototype.
Yeah, no, I understand. Likely the executive committee will be talking about it at their next meeting.
Good.
So I don't know if we have any kind of really firm resolution here for you. It seems like it's all over the place as far as, the approach to it.
So one more thing that might add to your discussion or debate that other communities or other local trust committees have talked about is around tourist season versus non-tourist season. Is there any benefit to going to a farmer's market potentially after tourist season? Or would it be good to capture those non-resident property owners at the farmer's market while they're here? Again, that would depend on the nature of Bowen and what you think might be best.
They're still here through to October.
Yes.
Okay.
If I may say so, one of the profoundly good arguments was by Island Trust is that its amenity is used by the whole of the province. And of course, the discussion will wipe out the province help with additional budget.
Yes.
So when you're discussing that, you're making this very good argument that the user, the province, and members and other visitors, of course, but the province, are big users, small contributors. And if you believe in that argument, and I think you should, then I see no reason why visitors wouldn't be included in your survey. And I put that up for discussion because that's what you believe, and that needs to be followed through.
Yeah.
As long as they're sort of relevant.
Yeah. Well, there is certainly a provincial interest in Islands Trust, and we've asked the province to work with us on how we might promote it province-wide to seek non-resident input as to the value and priorities for the area. We'll be breaking down any input received by resident, non-resident.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
And
All
Claire, sorry.
Yeah.
I'll just, as a member of the executive committee, I haven't been saying very much, but I'm just supportive of the process. I'm happy that you've come here. And I think I see this project as being like an OCP update, only for the whole Islands Trust area. And so it's going to be complex, and after 20 years it's going to be a bigger project. So that's part of the reason I think is behind the phasing of doing part of it at one time, next part later. But anyway, I'm look forward to seeing what you come up with. I think anything we've got here, in terms of the suggestions that have come to you, they'll all be good ones. You can help. Sophie can help too.
I think what you heard around the table, and certainly works for us from a staff perspective, is a multi-tiered approach to public consultation on Bowen, because we have a wide variety of different demographics living here. Some people who are on the internet, some that are not, and we find it effective if there's multi-pronged attack.
Terrific. Okay, so that will be our plan.
And the commuters have a hard time getting to community events. So they tend to be a discrete, an outreach kind of.
And that's where the ferry comes in.
That's where the ferry comes in.
Okay.
And from the budget perspective, if I'm remembering correctly, when this was looked at about 8 years ago, and then didn't happen, it was, I think, a $250,000 grant that was awarded but not taken up to do the full policy statement review.
Is the money still in the bank?
No, they turned the grant down.
Oh, great shame.
Yeah. So
That was
we had
2011, I think.
in 2011 we were successful in receiving a gas tax funding for $40 million to undertake the review of the entire document in a very fulsome way. And after the election, at that time, council decided to decline the grant and not proceed with the review at that time.
That That was a different council, a different trust council.
Were you on council at that?
No, we can turn down 12 million? No, probably not.
250,000. No, that would be nice. Yeah.
Well, 250,000.
Well, thank you, Claire. If there's no more discussion, we'll move on. We really appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for having all the way over to Bowen.
Very happy to be here. Thank you for the time.
Is that great? Thank you. And next. Ryan Gosman, yeah. Got the whole crew with you, great.
Except Jack's.
Yeah, where's Jack?
Jack's sends his regards, he had another engagement this evening.
I sent the
Apologize.
agenda and everything.
Well, the foundation.
You might still show up.
Yeah, true that. Yeah. All right.
Well,
It's all
good
yours.
evening, council and mayor. Thank you for having the Bowen Island Community Foundation here represented. Thank you for the opportunity to attend and listen to some really interesting presentations. We also want to thank you for your support for the Bowen Island Community Foundation's Youth at Risk Fund. We appreciate that, and we have sort of high hopes for that in the coming years. But we want to come and share with you a new initiative that we're hoping we can get your partnership with us, and that's the Neighborhood Small Grants Program. And we feel that it's a real perfect fit for Bowen Island community. And I want to introduce the Community Foundation's Vice Chair, Joanne Gassman, and new Director, James Glave. They are spearheading this initiative, and Joanne would like to give a little presentation, and we can answer your questions afterwards.
Great, thanks, Blake, and thanks for having us. I don't have a presentation per se, but I think you would have all received in your package the terms of reference, as well as Small is Beautiful, Neighborhood Small Grants. I'd like to leave most of my time for questions because I'm sure that you probably have them, but just to give you a little bit of an introduction, Neighborhood Small Grants have been part of the Vancouver Foundation's array of grant processing that they've had for the past 20 years. And there's now 20 communities in British Columbia that participate in the Neighborhood Small Grants. And they have had from time to time individuals that have approached them from Bowen Island wanting grants. And so they're very excited to partner with us, and we're excited to partner with them as far as pushing, taking this forward for Bowen. So the whole idea about the Neighborhood Small Grants, and we from time to time at the foundation receive requests for grants for $250 because somebody wants to build birdhouses, or $400 because somebody wants to learn or get their community together about collecting water for garden watering, etc. And so we turn those down. Our granting criteria is we give grants for larger amounts, generally over $2,000, and we give them to charitable organizations. We don't give them to individuals. So the Neighborhood Small Grants is actually totally opposite. These are where we give them to individuals, 2 or more individuals, and they're about $500 or up to $500 for discretion. So a little bit more about these, and that is with the Vancouver Foundation, they will provide funds, matching funds to us. So the way that this, we're looking at approaching this for 2020 is the Vancouver Foundation will give a 70-30 match, which is pretty good. So if we can give 30%, the Vancouver Foundation will give 70%. So what we're hoping to do in 2020 is to roll this out. The Community Foundation would like to put $1,500 towards it. We would like to come to the Bowen Island Municipality to match us with another $1,500, and then the Vancouver Foundation will come in with $7,000. With the Vancouver Foundation funds, what we can do is we can grant some of those funds out, and we can also use some of those funds for a program coordinator. So it's really all the funds that are generated and given on Bowen stay on Bowen. It's the Vancouver Foundation funds that will help us support from a program coordinator point of view. The goals about the Neighborhood Small Grants is really about community. and getting neighborhoods together. And we all know in Bowen there's a lot of neighborhoods. I think everybody can debate, but we know that there's at least 50 neighborhoods. And so our hope is that rolling this out in 2020 is that we'll have participation from a number of the neighborhoods, individuals coming to us for us to be able to give grants out. Things that we would look at granting for is, like I mentioned before, is it would be 2 individuals coming to us. They may have an idea, they may have an elder in their community that wants to share a story with regards to Indigenous. There may be a newcomer coming into somebody's community that the neighborhood wants to welcome and they want to have a potluck dinner. It may be that they want to do a neighborhood light up at Christmas time and they want to get the neighborhood together. So it's a very community-driven, individual-driven granting process. The granting period, as you may have saw, if we were to do this in 2020, there's a 6-week granting period. We would, the Community Foundation would put together a neighborhood small grants committee, and we would be responsible for that. We would, all of the processing of the grants, etc., are done through a website that the Vancouver Foundation supports. The granting committee would take a look at all of the applications, and then they would award the grants depending on what our budget is. So the grants all have to be used within that year by November of 2020, and then we would start the process again if we found this successful in the first year. So I think I'll pause there and just open it up for questions, because I'm sure you have some.
What would be the sort of range, what would be the top limit if you're
$500.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got a really great idea,
Yeah.
I'm sure that the committee would, if it was for $650, they would probably say okay. But the idea is that you keep the grant small so that you can have more neighborhood
distribution, yeah,
participate.
absolutely.
So that would be 10 grants, and 500 each,
Correct.
having done
Awesome.
Well,
David?
actually, it would be 20
that.
grants.
20 grants.
Yeah.
I've got it down here.
We have decided about 500.
Allison is right, because
Yeah.
if we got $10,000, there would be a budget for a program coordinator.
Yes.
We're not asking,
Oh.
we're not asking
She
for,
wouldn't say that.
we're not
She
asking
knew
for
that.
any municipal support, so we would be, the Bowen Island Community Foundation would be using some of those funds for a program coordinator, depending on how many hours we would need to have to roll it out. We have been successful, just to share with you, we have been successful. We applied for a grant from the Vancouver Foundation to help set this up in 2019, and we were successful. So we have a program coordinator that will be helping us put all the dotting the i's and crossing the t's and putting the program together in 2019, so that when we roll it out in 2020, we probably wouldn't have to use $5,000 for a coordinator. So the idea would be is if we have $10,000 and we spend, just say we spend $5,000 of the $7,000 that we get from the Vancouver Foundation, we would still have $5,000 grant out, and Allison was correct.
There you go.
I actually had calculated
Yes.
20, 500 each, not putting in any admin costs.
Well, my question actually, you pretty well answered it, but I mean, just sort of throwing out a figure of $5,000, that's very high admin costs. I mean, that's sort of, so I mean, so that was my question, is to try to understand what that admin cost would be. Does Vancouver Foundation have guidelines around that? I mean, most foundations want to keep your admin costs down.
Absolutely, and we do a lot of volunteer time within the community foundation. So
Yeah.
so most of those admin costs, I believe, are going to be used up this year that we've already got a grant for in the preparatory work. So some of that would be we'd be having a launch for the community so that the community would be able to learn about what are the grants.
Marketing the
And
program.
there's the marketing, there's little cards that have to go out to people, there's communities that we envision going out to all the little different communities within Bowen Island to make people aware that there is the grant process in place. So we're pretty prudent with our funds, and we prefer to grant them out rather than use them for admin costs.
And part of the admin would also be coordinating with the grant committee,
Right.
so that that person would have to organize that grant committee and that process, especially the first year.
Okay, my second question was just about the grants committee, the NGC.
Right,
So, and that would be all local people, or does the
absolutely, all local
Vancouver
people.
Foundation want? No,
No,
okay.
all local people.
All Bowen
Yeah.
Islanders.
Yeah.
We would look to try and have a diverse cross-section from the
Yeah.
different neighborhoods within Bowen. So
Okay.
they wouldn't all come from Smith Cove or, you know, Miller's Landing or wherever. We would obviously look for geographical disbursement.
Okay, thanks a lot. I support the idea. It's great.
Maureen?
I support the idea as well. A couple of suggestions. One is that it might be helpful in terms of public presentation to actually specify these are the startup administrative costs, these are the ongoing administrative costs, because my reaction was much the same as David's, which is, wow, 50% is a lot. The second point is, I'm just really delighted that you brought this to Bowen as a possibility. For a while, we had, and Holly knows this, we had innovation grants that were offered through the municipality that were more restrictive in terms of eligibility. So the openness of this and its potential responsiveness to neighborhood needs, I think is wonderful. And when it comes to a vote, I'm certainly going to be voting in support.
Great,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
I just speak to staff support. We had 2 meetings with Joanne and Joanne and James, and certainly Raj and I are excited by this program. And I think it could do a lot for our slightly fractured neighborhood. Geographically
Who wants to read the
fractured.
recommendation?
I'll just say, I'm in support of the motion too. I like the idea of the welcome parties and things like that. I think we have a lot of new people on Bowen and a lot of people who are part-time residents, so this would help to build some of that neighborliness and cohesion that has been a wonderful thing about the Bowen Island community, very tight. And anyway, I'll just go ahead and read the motion
Sure.
if people think. I will skip the whereases, if you don't mind, and just go straight to therefore be it resolved that the municipality enter into an agreement to act as community charitable partner for the receipt of grant funds from the Bowen Island Community Foundation and Vancouver Foundation, and disperse the grant funds based on recommendations from the Neighborhood Grants Committee, and further be it resolved that council support the program by providing initial matching funding in the amount of $1,500 to be included in the 2020 budget.
Second.
Second from David. Any further discussion? Ask a question, all in favor? Passing unanimous.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful violent agreement.
Hopefully it goes well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. Yes, indeed. So, 4.3 we've added on, and it's the library operating agreement. I think Raj, you're,
Page 47.
yeah.
Was Councillor Morse said that?
Yeah.
Tina and Raj.
I'm here for
So this is gonna be effective backwards or as of?
As of today, or whatever date, if you choose to adopt it, it would be the date of adoption.
A question about, you're using the word library building and Code Commons building, but it's really all one building, is it not now? Because they're all attached and connected together.
I just don't like to say the library building when it refers to the Arts Council's gallery half, because they do claim it as their half and pay rent there and are a different tenant, so, but if you prefer the language to be.
Well, I just, it's a building known as the Code Commons, well, it is, and it's an addition to the library known as the Code Commons sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's both, yeah.
Yeah. And then I'm curious on the third, I guess it is D10. The municipality is responsible for maintaining and repairing and utility infrastructure, including but not limited to septic and sewage system. So is that just maintaining what's in the ground? That's not requiring us to pay for the hookups to the sewer system?
Well, I think that is a discussion for a future day, but it is a municipal building.
Yeah.
So I think ultimately we are responsible for this.
So I was, curious as to how that was being interpreted. And then the maintenance and all that sort of stuff, snow removal, garden removal, and is this similar to all other municipal libraries where all the grounds are maintained and looked after by the municipality?
I haven't gone to the extent of other, okay.
I don't have that information, I haven't gone and asked, but I think most municipal libraries are on municipal property.
Yeah.
And the building, so
Yeah.
either the library budgets for it and puts it into their budget and hires their own staff to do it. I expect VPL and large libraries probably have their own staff and direct their own staff for that kind of maintenance. But I suspect there are probably medium and smaller sized libraries where the municipality itself, that the staff of the municipality would be. So either the library's gonna budget for it and then hire someone or have their own staff. for the
Yeah, and I think
municipality.
our philosophy when we went through this was the idea that it's a municipal library and ultimately it comes out of the same budget.
That's right.
Yeah,
And plus we have a public works department who sits up above.
I guess I was partly thinking as to right now, we've got volunteer efforts coming from the garden club to do some work on the gardens, and by making it are we gonna lose that volunteerism?
I don't think so. I mean, I think they would probably be thrilled to think that the work that they did would be maintained
Yes.
Yeah.
after they've
Yeah.
done the work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think they would still.
Probably encourage more
Yeah.
volunteer activity.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
I
well,
see.
that's, and it's not an intention to get rid of that.
No,
No,
Right,
not at all.
That was my other concern. So number 6, G, when I was on the library board in West Van, we used to have to make an appeal to council to carry forward any surplus, to put it into our reserve funds or use it to reduce the next year's operating budget or carry it forward to use for things. So, I'm a little uncomfortable with just the library board and making a recommendation and then.
Which number are you on?
I'm on 6. G.
So you'd be kidding that the
G6.
chief financial officer shouldn't have that level of authority?
I'm indicating he can make a recommendation to council through the budget process, which is, I don't know whether West Van changed their policies, but when I was on the library board, we had to get down and bend the knee to keep our surplus.
I think the tradition here has not been bended knee. It's-
No, in fact, it's a
Yeah.
change from the current policy in which we keep our surplus automatically without asking anyone a question. So it's actually a change somewhat in the other direction to say that
So it's a
municipal
probably-
staff member will have, we would make a recommendation to the
So if he's
CFO.
uncomfortable with it or the size of it or whatever, then he could bring it forward to council. So it's a step in the right direction from a financial accountability to council from my
Sure.
perspective. Sorry about that, Amy. And then I was just curious as to why all the chief librarians' PD development costs wouldn't be covered under the library budget.
Doesn't it say that?
No, it says the chief librarian may also request municipality fund training programs specifically for library staff. So why all of the library staff training and librarians training wouldn't be funded under the library budget?
I think that's what it's saying, just a slightly different terminology.
I think, yeah, the next sentence that says training costs are determined and allocated in advance of the training to budget of the library with the agreement of both parties.
Okay.
So they'd be included in their operating.
So I think it's
There is a
like,
provision
for example, at the moment, there are
Right.
certain things that we are very kindly offered, emergency planning, et cetera, so any of our staff that sit on that, WIMIS training, a bunch of things that when you guys are offering that to a big blanket of people, that you kindly include the library in that, which we're grateful for. But then there's other things that, of course,
All right.
we fund.
And then I just wanted to make a comment on Schedule B. I'm ecstatic to see those parking spots.
Oh, yeah, that's an old drawing.
Yeah.
We have a different parking plan we'll be showing you July 22nd if you'd like to consider that.
I like the one on Schedule B.
Okay, Allison, what do you think?
Well,
Is that it?
yeah, other quick
Okay,
questions.
so
They go
we're-
down to.
Okay, you want to read the
No.
OSO?
As a member of the library board, I'd be delighted to read the recommendation.
Could you do that for us?
Yes.
No.
And so here I am, oops, 3.4, wrong page. That council approve and adopt the revised operating guidelines between the Bowen Island Municipality and the Bowen Island Public Library.
Second that. And any further discussion? All in favor? Thank you, unanimous. Thanks,
Great.
Tina.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Have a lovely meeting.
Can I just stay?
9 years.
Yeah.
You don't have to rush on.
Have dinner at 10, it'll be fine.
5.1, Raj.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So this report here requests that Council approve the first 3 readings for a loan authorization bylaw to borrow up to $2,533,000 for construction of the Cove Bay Water Treatment Plant. I'm going to throw some numbers your way in the next paragraph, and I've provided you with a handout that summarizes the numbers I'm going to talk to, so you can kind of put them in context. So basically continuing on with my report here, senior levels of government have approved $3.9 million in grant funding. A municipal contribution of $3.7 million is required to meet the estimated cost of construction. $1.2 million will be funded from the Cove Bay Water Reserve, leaving a $2.5 million shortfall in funding to address the municipal funding requirement for this project. There don't appear to be any other grant opportunities, and borrowing is the most viable funding source for this project. In terms of the project design drawings are almost complete, and the project team is ready to put the project out for tender. Municipal funding for the shortfall should be addressed before the contract is awarded after tender. In addition to the proposed loan authorization bylaw here, the report before you contains information on what the annual debt servicing costs will be of the proposed loan, how they'll be funded in principle, that is through water user rates, and the report gives you an idea of what the additional cost to water users would be. It's just an approximate idea. It's about $215 per household or user. And it also contains the detailed timelines of the steps to be followed to obtain the borrowing. So starting the borrowing process now by providing the first 3 readings of the loan authorization will allow staff to ensure that funds are in place by the spring of 2020 to meet the anticipated cash flow obligations of the project. There's quite a bit of information in the report there. I tried to be as comprehensive as I could to give you an idea of the timeline for borrowing, and provided some background that has brought us to where we're at right now. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Raj, just back to the presentation by Bill Granger.
Yeah.
What's the deal with the rates that are going to go down after, usually they go up substantially after your quota?
I didn't quite understand Mr. Granger's points, because currently in Cove Bay, the fixed cost for water is about $615 a year, plus overusers pay an additional $1.10 over, I believe, 35 meters.
Oh.
So they pay $1. So in addition to the $615 flat rate, if you're consuming above a threshold amount, you'd be paying a variable rate of $1.10 per cubic meter of water.
So there's,
But the normal rate's $615?
No, $600.
At the
$615 per year. Yeah.
$615 per
You
year is
said
the
that
flat
the-
rate.
It was
You said the normal rate,
159.
159 or 155.
Yeah, so he was dividing the,
He must have been dividing it by 3. It's about $205. We bill in thirds.
Yeah.
So it would be,
Oh,
on
so it'd be
a billing period, we would be billing $205 plus the variable rate for the high consumers.
I got the feeling he was dividing
Yeah.
the 615 by the 35 cubic meters or whatever it was,
Can I-
to come up to
Okay.
a per gallon.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead.
I'm pretty sure that if you think of it in terms of tiers,
Mhm.
that the basic rate is, I think you referred to as $1.59,
Yeah.
not as in his letter, which said $1.99.
Yes,
And
correct.
then the next rate is at $1.10. So instead of paying more
You pay
at a
less.
higher rate for consuming
That's
more,
right.
you're paying at a lower rate for consuming more.
If I can suggest, we can come back with another report at a later time that talks about Cove Bay water user rates. I mean, the
That's
discussion
right.
of this report, I think, is a loan authorization
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
bylaw.
Okay.
That's just-
My question was only gonna be, could we revisit the idea of rates with more information
Well,
later?
Roger.
Well, could I
Yeah.
just put my plug in there for our water infrastructure master planning? And it's also to look at our rates and how we
Thank
bill,
you.
how we meter,
Yeah.
and I think that needs to be looked at island-wide.
Right.
Yeah. So all I'm saying is, today's decision won't stop us from doing any of
That's
that.
cool,
Yeah.
no.
That's all, that was my
Oh,
question.
So,
And the other one, I had
Yes.
one more, was just, is the grant extension in place now?
For this?
Well, all these
Yes, yes, it
funds,
is.
we've got it all,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
just checking, thank you.
We got a year's extension.
I'm totally in favour of focusing on this, setting the other stuff aside. I'd just like to know that someone would make a little pencil note of some of that. We will in fact do that, because I think Bill Wade got his numbers right, all the rest. He came up with some profoundly
Yeah.
worthwhile points.
Well,
Please, let's not forget it. Can we just forget it for
So
now?
after the flat rate,
Stay
it's more
focused,
punitive
get
costs.
this done, and then
Yeah,
we'll
we're gonna do the
come
other
back
part
to
later.
it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, sorry.
Yeah, the only other point I'd add is that, and Bill made this point, who is the water user in this scenario? Is it just the people who draw on the Cove Bay water system, or does it extend to the rest of the island? That it's not addressed here, but it does need to be addressed along with the tiering system
Yes.
and making sure that there is some sort of incentive for conservation.
Here.
If we can I just add to that? If we are thinking about cross-island water management, it's counterintuitive to think about Cove Bay only in terms of the individual household users of that water. Yeah.
Hard to say. So,
I think this is a really good point, and I'm glad somebody's brought it up. I'm thinking about the various public buildings that we're putting down into the cove as well, the fire department and the community center. It's just going to be more of a community focus. I don't think anything about it is bad. It's just going to be, as well as the schools and the other community services. Restaurant, well, and the businesses, I haven't thought about them. But also thinking from a climate change and drought emergency, should we have one kind of perspective. If Cove Bay Water District is going to be called upon to do work outside of its boundaries, it would be good to have some thought into that. So I like the island-wide cross-islands kind of idea, and I'm wondering, could that be adjusted at a different rate, or does this bylaw depend on it being these users only?
yeah, could
This
we-
bylaw does not depend on it being these users only. This bylaw, essentially, the bylaw is just a loan authorization bylaw authorizing us to borrow up to a certain amount. And so, and when we make our application to the minister, we have to just provide an overall statement of how we are going to repay this loan, and that will be through user rates. And I don't think we need to go down to the specifics of what we were talking about at this
But we
point
do
in
have
time.
to determine that
But in time.
AAP, and as
Yes.
part of the public consultation as well. And our interim director of engineering is also at a high level right now involved with this project, but I think he's heard us tonight too, because this is a conundrum we've had for many years.
Yeah.
So I think we should
Thank
just
you.
focus on what's in front of
Yeah,
us.
I just want to make sure that was
get some
all was
information.
in front of us, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've, one question is, I mean, at this point, it's a service area, and the service areas pay their own costs, and I think we'd have quite an extensive island debate. And if we build buildings and put in the community center, we're gonna be on a meter and paying for the water just like everybody
And we'll be
else.
paying
Correct.
hookup costs
And
as well.
hookup costs and everything else, so it's not
Yeah.
as if we're not. And the other question is,
That's
if you're
our
expecting
approach so far.
somebody outside of the service area to repay, then I think you might have to have an island-wide AEP,
Absolutely.
which
Yeah.
would not
Anyway, that's really another discussion. Let's just get this.
That is something we have to discuss with both Glenn and the Cope Water Committee, and it's, as I said, it's been a conundrum for a long time.
The recommendation reads that bylaw number 488, 2019, citing as Bowen Island Municipality loan authorization Cope water treatment plant. Bylaw number 488, 2019, be read the first, second, and third time. Second, Maureen, and any further discussion, all in favor? Thank you, unanimous. Thank you, Raj.
Thank you.
Staff reports, we'll come up with consent agenda reports of committees, commissions. Councillor Hawking and Nicholson, Environmental and Climate Action Advisory.
I think you were going to deal with item 12.6, wasn't it, under correspondence?
Yeah,
That's right.
I asked
Oh,
for
were we?
that to be
Okay,
pulled.
sorry, yeah, my fault.
It's just a short email regarding the ongoing issue with building the small houses down in the marina. And Oitis has addressed it to mayor and council, but it's actually a request regarding getting support from the Islands Trust. So I think somebody needs to respond to that and just provide some practical suggestions about how she can obtain that, because I don't think writing to us necessarily is.
It's translated.
Yeah. So I, so we can follow up. We know where Claire is, and maybe she's staying at their location tonight.
Yeah.
No, she's staying in there.
No, she's gone.
She's here.
Or, no, but she's going.
I think
Yeah,
we
where's
brought it
Claire?
to the attention of Islands Trust.
I think the letter might be attached as well from Pamela Goldsmith Jones, might be great.
And we also sent our own letter.
For Island Trust.
Yeah. It doesn't appear to have gone to the Islands
No,
Trust.
she hasn't.
No.
No, so that letter might be, to attach that letter.
Yeah.
I can forward it on.
We will send it to Claire.
Thank you. I would suggest the Islands Trust Executive Committee.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
So maybe, perhaps we can have a motion to that the correspondence from Oitis Dyke be referred to the Islands Trust Executive.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you. Good.
Thank you, Maureen, for bringing that to our attention.
Pack 8.1. Councillor Hawking and Nicholson.
I will declare a conflict of interest since my husband receives a pension from one of those 20 oil companies. You don't have that conflict?
Why would that be a conflict?
It's a pecuniary
Pension.
interest.
Well, in that case, I have to declare conflict as well.
Yes, I'm going to say that means I better leave as well, because people with significant holdings in these things can't stay in the room.
I would like to defer this item, and I'll get an opinion from our lawyer, because I don't think this is a conflict of interest.
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Come on back, Allison.
I move,
Yeah, you've made your theatrical point.
I move that this item be postponed to the meeting of July 22nd.
In order for staff to receive a legal opinion.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, the letters that were written, they're not in my, there's, if you look here, it looks as if there's a link, but I don't have it in mine. I don't know. Do I have an old?
They're
You
there.
have-
They're
you have
there.
one?
Yeah.
Okay, I've got it all.
I saw, because I read those letters. God, sorry. Yeah,
There
climate
should be
letters
two
to oil
attachments.
companies are in the,
I don't have it in mine for some reason. I don't know why. I guess I had an early draft or something.
No, I think you should be, you're online, so can you maybe just.
So maybe what it is, Hope, that was,
There's
it looks
nothing-
like it was added in as.
It was added in on
So
Friday.
maybe David looked at
oh,
it
wait a
before
second,
we
this
added.
email has come from.
You're looking at the first version, and
I
there's
guess
the
so.
revised version.
Yeah, this is the latest
Is this
one.
online or did you download it?
So, motion to defer?
I
Motion.
downloaded it back.
I made the motion.
Yeah.
Second, thank
Yeah.
you.
All in favor?
On third.
Defer.
Oops.
That passed.
Back.
You can vote on the motion to
Yeah.
defer.
Say yourself.
I pulled my hand down.
You can defer.
Okay.
Is there a time limit on this letter? Like,
No.
are they waiting for us to have
No,
this, or
there is not.
But we'll get a legal opinion report back to the, before the next
That's-
council meeting.
It is on the
That's-
position.
I know, but I want all of council to be aware of that, because you asked a councillor if they were gonna do conflict.
We weren't gonna have a quorum.
I move to postpone it till July 27th.
Yeah. We will, any council member who feels that they may be in conflict, we'll send a legal opinion to all seven.
I realize absolutely I wouldn't have to leave. I worked for Petro-Canada way back, but it's not one of the 20 biggest oil companies in the world, so.
Oh, you're not getting a pension.
It doesn't matter.
8.2?
8.2, councillors Kale, Morris, and Nicholson on the
Um,
community economic development.
Hopefully this is self-explanatory.
I certainly hope it is, given that we spent 15 minutes talking about toilets at the
Probably 15 minutes
Community
too
Economic
long.
Development Committee. The recommendation is that council direct staff to look into simple signage to direct people to public washroom facilities. It would be very much appreciated by tourists, by the local businesses, by the tourism Bowen staff. There's the question of where does the money come from for these simple signs? Presumably the municipality makes simple signs all the time.
That's not an issue, but what is deemed public washroom facilities? Because there is the one right off the ferry.
Yeah,
There's the one, there's the one at the ferry. There's also the facilities in Crippen Park.
Correct.
Specifically, what
Baseball.
ended up being talked about were the facilities at the baseball field, where no one would ever imagine there were facilities.
little arrow.
Yeah. So just at Orchard Lane, if you put a sign at Orchard Lane, the community can.
Because we can also work with Metro Vancouver to see if they can put more, we'll put it on our property, but also we can speak to them.
They will not do it.
Really?
We've had that conversation.
Yeah.
We just need something when people are walking.
Oh, I
on the
get
road
that,
to the
yeah,
point that-
yeah.
Yeah, so I really would just like to move this recommendation.
I'll second it, just to get it rid of it. Any further discussion? Good, all in favor?
Under the circumstances.
It's
Okay.
just, we also have a little one up here on the,
Yeah, adding the portable toilet there too.
portable toilets up here, and I just, if there were other things that needed to be on it, we've got the portable ones up here.
Perhaps we could leave it in staff's hands to determine where these signs
I'll review
might.
the recording of the last CBD.
We could have a small understanding amongst us that every new sign we put up, we take one down.
That would be nice.
Yes, because it does begin to look like count the signs, right? So someone wanted this, we will do a graphic, I'm sure at some point we will do a graphic thing for our signage. But really, have you seen how many little boards and stuff we've got?
Yes.
Well,
So-
under Mayor Adelar's council, I think they were gonna undertake a sign inventory.
Yes, well, maybe one goes up, one has to come down.
They did the roadside.
Did you move it?
Yeah.
It's moved and seconded.
Yeah.
You just
Yeah,
haven't put- and we voted.
We can go on.
Okay, just one question before we move on is, where were the complaints coming from? Sorry to belabor this.
We had well, there'd be multiple, but we had a breakfast session with the retailers and the restaurants in the Cove.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of talk. And also from tourism, Bowen Island
Really hard not to snort.
as well.
Oh,
The Ruddy is extremely annoyed at having
Yeah.
ongoing
Sure.
toilet facilities for every bus full of tourists that crop up in Village Square, so.
Yeah.
Are there
Yeah,
bus stops
agreed.
for tourists?
Yes, there are.
Look at the shoes.
The seniors, there was an animal bus here the other day, and that's 24.
So we will certainly, as staff, look into low-cost signage,
Investigate that.
or maybe just a staff person.
Just see the
A
sign that
sandwich
says
board.
washroom with an
Sandwich
arrow.
board.
Yeah.
Sandwich board.
Washroom with an arrow stuck on the telephone pole.
We'll figure it
Anyway,
out. Yeah.
that's enough.
Did we do all in favor?
Yeah.
Yes.
But it passed unanimously.
Business arising from the minutes, 9.1. Okay, goes back. Oh.
Oh, right.
I sent an email around last week,
Yeah.
just,
Sorry,
Some-
I hate to interrupt. Could we deal with 9.2
Two.
first?
Yeah,
And just in
yeah.
case if we lose our audience?
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't hurt my feelings at all.
Rhonda's here to the end, she's got
Yeah.
questions for questions.
Okay, well, we might lose her during UBCM discussion.
Yeah.
Yes, no problem. Or would you like me to? oh.
Yeah, I'll
Would you like
just preface it. Ron, we have a resolution that's come out of our closed meeting that we're releasing to the public about the multi-use path, and I will pass it over to
Okay. Whereas council is committed to a multi-use pathway across Bowen Island, and whereas council has received additional information identifying feasibility concerns and potential additional cost overruns for the current design of phase 1 of the multi-use path planned for construction in summer 2019, therefore be it resolved that council directs staff to work with the urban systems to review and revise the design for the multi-use path, including phase 1, and report back to council in fall of 2019.
So I'd like to move that.
We did already.
Yeah, it's just original
Just
stuff.
information.
Resolution.
You don't have to do it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's not the way to ask questions.
Yes.
Now we just gotta really hang around.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. I had a couple of UBCM.
Yeah,
Ideas.
we're almost there. Okay, so back to you, Hope, on the 9.1 then.
I am just waiting for council members to provide me with some ideas of
Suggestions.
meetings they would like to request, and I see Swillet has a list.
I have a couple.
You sent
But
us.
I think Maureen had her hand up.
Yeah, Maureen.
Yeah. I think we have to meet with Minister Donaldson of Monroe.
Yeah.
The Lord. Is this going to come up on this PDF?
It was in the note you sent around.
Our,
Where's
this
the note?
presentation computer is just stopped using Microsoft products, and so I can't edit anything, but I'm typing,
Okay.
and I can circulate it
It's
after the
invisible
meeting.
ink.
Yeah.
I was just,
Okay.
so I can circulate it after the meeting if that's helpful.
And that's relog.
And the topics with him are essentially the same ones as last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
logging, the rural definition,
Well, okay.
and park expansion. We should follow up with him regarding that.
Yeah.
And-
Why are we talking rural?
We're talking rural because we want to close a circle.
I mean, if it's all cut and dry, we can say thank you if we.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a
Yes.
short meeting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Just confirmation.
yeah.
Okay.
And I think Minister Trevano,
Yes,
How's it?
Moti,
Yeah.
transportation. Trevena.
Yeah.
Yeah, electric buses.
Yeah.
Bowen has this, we can tell her about the pilot now that's
Yeah.
coming. And, but also the electric ferries.
I was going to say electric buses.
Well,
Sorry.
It might be.
and Minister Robinson, Municipal
Selena,
Affairs and
yeah.
Housing.
Now, with
About-
Minister Trevina, we may want to put in something about ride-in.
Sure.
Because ride-hailing, I forgot to go and pay attention to whatever she said today.
Yeah, that's, yeah, I don't know what.
But there's still information to come out, like rules and regulations from Passenger Transportation Board or whatever, so I guess just encouraging having a flexibility so that it will solve the first mile, last mile issues for small communities and let small communities be creative in
Mhm.
solving their solutions, so not sort of, limiting
Size.
Yeah.
to Uber or.
With everybody else, yeah.
Yeah.
So those were my three.
Those are
Yeah.
really good. Hydro, right?
I have one.
Yes.
Well, that's
Yeah,
good.
mine is BC Hydro. To help the cables come ashore better, for example, if they're gonna do any more, I just think we should tell them about their cable
All the
coming
walkways.
ashore at September more, and they need to do a better job at other places because it came apart. The first storm.
Cable came apart?
No, where they put that in where the cable came ashore.
Yeah,
yes.
And they put that trail and the stairs on top of
yes,
it.
yeah.
Well, it came apart at the first winter storm, so I think we should let them know
But that,
that they could do better.
may have been not expected.
That was a
That was a
one.
lot.
It's an era of climate change and,
That's great.
yeah. Anyways, the second thing is I'd like to say is, I think we can encourage BC Hydro. I think we can encourage BC Hydro to work with BC Ferries to get electric cables down to the ferry terminal. And on that side, because apparently this is one of the things that is, has been mentioned by the chair, the CEO of BC Ferries as an issue, is that they can't produce electric ferries that are traveling the routes until they get the power lines all the way down.
Why should we have anything to do with that?
Because Bowen Islanders have talked about electric ferries and climate action. We have electric ferries in our island plan, and they're also in our transportation plan. And if that's something that's holding up electric ferries for Bowen, then why wouldn't we lobby BC Hydro to be more proactive, more collaborative about that?
Yeah.
And
I thought we were just dealing with ministry meetings.
oh,
okay.
And I think we could say thank you for allowing the solar co-op to still do its net metering program, because the solar co-op has now come to Bowen Island and it's got people all excited, and it was one of the things we asked for last time. And that's the main things I had there for BC Hydro.
When's the deadline? Oh, sorry, Rob, go ahead.
Okay, cool. Just on the transportation minister, and I know in 2018, pulled it up here, passenger ferry was one of the things we talked with him about, and that came up quite a bit at the conference I was at, so I think it'd be good to keep that ball, to make sure that that's still in there. And then I'm wondering, is TransLink going to be there? Is there an opportunity to meet with TransLink? And I'm specifically thinking of, we're doing...
They're usually their staff in attendance.
Yes.
So,
But there's no
there's
official
no
meeting.
opportunity to
Okay,
meet them.
that's good. Thanks.
I'm not cutting you off.
Sorry, I may have missed it. What were the key points for municipal fairs and housing?
Housing, but also the community center, I believe, just an update
The
of
funding,
some sort.
yeah.
And an enthusiastic, and we're waiting to hear the outcome.
Except, Minister Robinson, it's, all the applications are being processed through the Ministry of Transportation.
Well,
Infrastructure.
it couldn't hurt.
I think we need to meet with Liam Evans and
Staff as well.
We can do
Absolutely.
that. But
Yeah.
I think just keeping
Yeah.
them informed about what's going
Oh,
on.
yeah.
And it could
Oh,
be
yeah, it
both
doesn't hurt to tell her
Claire
that she's
and
not
Selena.
going to have anything to do with
No.
decision making.
No.
But she will about housing, and we
Yeah.
want to keep the,
And just coming back to Hydro, I went over my notes from last UBCM, and we were supposed to follow up and organize a meeting with Hydro and ferries and BIM, and we didn't do it. So we have to be cautious about going back and not having.
Pounding on the table, yeah.
Well, it seems to me some of the sessions that I've been to on Horseshoe Bay, they have upgraded hydro so they can have electric ferries on the list.
They're still saying that's an issue, the way Sewell describes it.
Yeah, but they've got to encourage them to get it in there.
Excuse me, Brother, with hydro, if that's an issue, I know we have our additional BC hydro cables. Well, if you can imagine how many electric cars and stuff that are going to be in various garages and laneways around this island, presumably you've done a sort of audit that you know something? There is enough power still coming to the audit to take all this extra demand. I mean, I can't answer that for sure.
It's a good question.
But if one says, we see a swing here towards electric, and I presume we have new power supply from BC, from hydro, I would like to say, if everybody has an electric car and they all plug it in at the same time, the island doesn't have a little seaward and no berth.
just one of the things about electric cars, I don't know very much about electric cars, except that most people plug them in at night
Yes.
when there's less draw.
Yeah.
So that may be why we haven't brought it up before, but not to say we should.
I was thinking at winter time, when you've got everybody on their Netflix, they've got their heating going and stuff like that, and it's just a simple question, it's a simple audit question.
And their Tesla plugged in.
Yeah.
So maybe the question should more be the capacity of the cable.
Yeah.
And is there
For
adequate
future needs.
capacity powering the cable on the other side?
When we were having these conversations 3 years ago and they were putting in the new cable, they said that they were going to be doubling the capacity to Bowen Island. So what we would do is we would ask them you know,
Confirm
given the trends, you
Yeah.
know, does that still look as though that double capacity is gonna be adequate for Bowen?
That's the question.
All right. Is that good for you, Hope, for now? Okay, thank you. If anybody thinks of anything else that they might want to,
And BC Parks
Be
is under
interested.
Spring Road?
So Hope and I'll work on something and then forward it to council for input.
What about Minister Heyman? Is Parks under
Well, that's-
Heyman? That's what I'm
He's
wondering.
the Minister of Environment, Mayor is.
Yeah.
Environment
He's
and
environment.
climate change.
Who is Parks under?
If Claire, is provincial parks under the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
you're right.
so that's-
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Claire.
all right, so we're gonna move on to new business. Update Metro Vancouver Director, David.
So I don't have any new updates today.
Thank you.
Okay.
Islands Trust Municipal Trustees, Fast and Kale, update.
Just very simply, I just some conversations. I think we've gained since our last meeting an appreciation of some of the complications that are coming out from this survey. It's a very complex thing that Islands Trust is trying to do. Can you imagine the logistics, all the islands and all that? And I think we're trying to come to grips with that, and it's definitely a matter of discussion, and I'm sure you're going to get it at the executive, where some of the trustees are saying, gee, this is expensive, is this going to work, is this going to, there is a discussion right now, it's not a hostile discussion, there's a discussion which says, we're doing this little bit, or we're doing this part. I think Councillor Nicholson described it as dry, and it is not exactly a tap down some of the stuff when you start going through. It is academic in some respects. So there's going to be, I think we're recognising certain challenges of getting these messages over and getting some feedback over such a diverse populations. It's not as they're all grouped together.
When you say we, you mean trust council?
Trustees, yes.
Some trustees?
Yeah, it says we appreciate the difficulties and are expressing some concerns on this. It is a good subject for discussion, the scope of this, and it's going to be a very expensive operation. As I said, $45,000 plus staff costs, and this is the first phase. So this is not going to be some chump change item, just an appreciation of, hey, we appreciate that this is an extremely difficult exercise to conduct. It's being done at great expense. It can't probably be done less. I'm not arguing about whether they're spending the right amount of dollars, but yeah, that is going to be something we looked at with the strategic plan, and with 26 people in a CAO around the table to try and do a strategic plan is another logistical challenge. So as I spend longer on the trust, begin to appreciate and try to rationalise and help deal with some of these quite taxing and vexing issues of something Peter Luckham's a very experienced chair, by the way, and trying to manage that and get some appreciation is something that we are doing, and it's going to throw up some good debate. Really.
It's a significant project.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So?
I thought you'd like to know, last week I was in Victoria for executive committee, and I was also on Hornby and Denman for chairing their local trust committee meetings, their monthly trust committee meetings. And on Hornby, 34 people stood up to speak in the local public comments part, and it was like a public hearing. And anyway, a feisty, or shall I say lively meeting. I think, but a good meeting, and remarkable community input. I think I wanted to mention, Claire's here, of course we didn't have to have any more about that. Can't read my writing about that one. I learned in the executive committee that Bowen will be included in a $10,000 grant that the province is going to do about the concerns about salt water coming into wells. And on some islands, this is an issue or at least a concern. And this can happen as sea level rises and as wells and demand get deeper and salt water gets drawn up from deeper. So it's one of those concerns for growing density and climate change and all those things. So I thought you might be interested that we were going to actually get some data about that and that Bowen would be included in that. Claire will correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, I think that's correct. And we have an opportunity to share costs, perhaps, Daniel's gone, but regarding our housing needs assessment that we're going to do, Salt Spring Island needs to do theirs as well. And so if we wanted to share a consultant or do some kind of project with Salt Spring, we might be able to bring the costs down for that, although maybe we're going to get a grant and it's no big deal, but I wanted to put that possibility out there. Islands Trust Conservancy Report is in your package, 12.2A, and our latest letter from the Trust Council about the Trans Mountain Pipeline are expressing our dismay that it had been approved the day after a climate emergency Canada-wide had been declared, is 12.2B, and the community stewardships were awarded, that's 12.2C, and that's what I've got to report. Just for future, I noticed that one of the community stewardship awards was for a recycling group on one of the islands that had been running for 44 years, and I wondered if Bowen could beat that somewhere. Anyway, but that's, unless anybody's got any questions, I've just a few things going on.
Thank you. All right, Maureen, Metro Council.
The Parks has not met in a couple of months. We're meeting this Wednesday, and then we're together all day the following Friday for Parks tour. So I'll have something to report next time.
All right, thank you. And Allison, anything on that?
Well, the links to the reports I referred to the last time, the cost sharing for road, bike, and walk cost sharing, Hope put in the minutes for the last meeting, and she also put in the link for the interurban passenger rail report. And we all saw the new mobility program and the bus and everything today. So we should be asking Bronwyn, because she got to go on the tour.
Oh, wow.
And ride around as to how the app works and everything. So the bus looked really nice, and it will be fun to see it driving around in the neighborhood.
Well, we can hope for wonderful things.
Yeah.
There was a vote at your last TransLink Mayor's Council. Wasn't there a big vote? Oh well, never mind. I can't remember.
It's the interurban one you're probably talking about. Maybe. I'm just looking at the...
I had something I was going to ask you. I've forgotten it. Never mind.
It must have been the interurban passenger rail or the preliminary report on the Surrey line. No, that was the info.
There's an express bus going from the North Shore to...
Oh, the express bus across, yeah, the express bus across,
Secondary.
and going over from Phibbs to Kootenai.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's, that was maybe,
Okay.
Thank you.
yeah.
Items are removed from the consent.
Really quick, Allison, on the on-demand, what was going to be the interaction with the public on setting up an app? Like, were they going to do that?
Yeah, but they're gonna be at the library.
Okay.
I'll have to go back and.
Posters.
Posters and things telling you where to go, and there's a link on the, was on the back of the bus. It was TransLink/Bowen, I think, and that'll take you into the instructions for setting up the app. And there's also a phone number for people that aren't comfortable using the app. And they will have people here showing us how to do it.
So that's still coming, and that will be there.
Yeah, that's sort of over the next.
The app, for anybody who wants, it's called Tap Ride.
Yeah, I thought that was really
Just
quite cute.
in the App Store, Tap Ride Bowen.
I loaded it on down there at the park.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
really, if I can do it.
I could probably do it then too.
No, I just saying. It was aimed at more.
We've got,
Items removed from the consent agenda, we got 3.6, which I think Allison, is yours, and 3.9, Maureen.
The communications coordinator position. Yeah, I have a whole bunch of questions. So there were two different colors of editing, which is one curious question. But if I'm reading this correctly, on page 5, all this orange stuff it's largely all new.
Yeah.
So, I'm trying to tell this in the notes that printed off on the back page. Okay, it talks about electronic and paper correspondence addressed to the mayor, a councillor, or a mayor and council together. Well, what about a mayor and some councillors? Must be given to the corporate officer for distribution to mayor, council, and applicable staff. So, what exactly does that mean? If some citizen sends me an email about something, do I then have to send it to everybody, or send it to Hope, or?
That's a good
So
point.
sometimes, Allison, we receive correspondence that's to the BIM email, but it's addressed to mayor and council, so we will circulate it to all of council. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's only addressed to the mayor, but it's relevant to all of council, and we'll share it with all of council and applicable staff.
But I think that Allison's example is a good one where a constituent may write to an individual council member, and I don't think there should be a need.
And that's
That's
not,
okay,
that
it
was
doesn't
not, that
say-
was not the intention here.
But
It was the
that's how it
correspondence.
reads.
Okay,
It says electronic or paper correspondence addressed to a councillor must be given to the corporate officer for distribution to mayor, council, and applicable staff.
I think it really overreaches. I was looking at it and wondering if you just simply replaced must with may, and that would bring into play discretion of councillors
Yeah,
and
I agree.
the mayor.
because the next one is the one that says anything addressed to mayor and council sent directly to, maybe that's the one where you wanna say, if it's sent just to a
No,
councillor.
because that's,
Individual.
they're dealing with how they're gonna deal with mail there that goes to mayor and council at NBC. So that's fine. It was this first one that
Yeah.
was.
Yeah, I agree.
It
Yeah,
overreaches.
Yeah,
I agree with you also.
Yeah.
so.
I thought it might have been, if somebody has something for a mayor and councillor, mayor and council, and they just send it to one of us that they know,
Yeah, but how do we know? I mean, if they're saying,
I think we would just send it.
What we
We
don't
would
want
just
to do
say
is preclude the relationship between council members and
Yeah.
individuals.
For sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
so
I
I,
think adjusting it to may would clarify that point, and that was certainly not the intention.
And by, to mayor, I guess, I mean, you open the mayor's correspondence, I presume, so, or no, the email, no, so any individual, yeah.
A lot of the time, as corporate officer, I receive correspondence on behalf of mayor and council.
Oh, yeah, which is fine, yeah. Yeah. 7.5. What is actionable versus info? So in 7.5, it says actionable correspondence will be included in the next scheduled meeting agenda.
Well, if it
And then
requires.
3 says correspondence sent for information will be included in the next scheduled council meeting.
I don't see
So
some-
that makes clear, but actionable, what is the definition of actionable? Because I remember raising a question where one of the mayors had written to us and asked us to pass a resolution, and it was in the information items. And that, to me, it's actionable from their side, because they want us to take an action. But staff has decided it's not actionable and put it in the information.
Just because it's
section.
under information items doesn't mean it's not actionable. That's, I think, a good example was Councillor Nicholson pulling the correspondence today from
Yeah,
Oitis. So there's that opportunity, but we're inundated with emails from
Oh, I
other
know.
municipalities with issues that,
nothing to do with it.
nothing to do with us. So in those cases, we put them under information item. If there's a council champion who feels we should be dealing with it, they can pull it off
Yeah.
information item,
Yeah,
move it to correspondence.
absolutely.
But I guess my concern again is, it's not sent, is that type of correspondence sent to us for information? Or is it information, it's correspondence sent to us requesting an action? So there's some,
Staff will decide.
I usually indicate in my emails that I send with correspondence whether it'll be on information
Yeah.
items or correspondence. And if it's on correspondence, during the agenda review, we usually have a draft motion, or we'll draft a motion at that time, depending on what the request is.
Yeah.
And the actionable versus non-actionable are just opinions and statements versus a specific request. Like most recently, the September Warren beach access. We have several pieces of correspondence that were requesting specific action, so that was under correspondence.
but I could pull other things out of the information items where people
And
have
that's-
written asking for specific action, and we put them under the information. So that's, I guess, my confusion.
Under correspondence?
If you,
Maureen?
okay, you've got 3, correspondence sent for information. If you have for 4, correspondence requiring a response will be included in the next schedule. Because that's, the stuff that goes into correspondence is something where there is kind of an expectation that we will be responding to it.
Yeah,
And we want to
that's-
have
that's
that
better-
discussion.
Better wording.
So correspondence requiring a response will be
But
included.
my concern with that is, again, going back to correspondence received from other municipalities about something that's happening for
And
St.
wanting
John,
us
and wanting us to.
Send a letter.
Yeah, so if
Yeah.
you use those conditions, we would be putting that correspondence under correspondence rather than information items. I think what this does right now is it gives staff the flexibility, whether it's staff deem it actionable or not, it will always appear on an agenda, it's just a matter of where it appears on an agenda.
Okay, so I think maybe the question is, actionable correspondence will be included in the next scheduled council meeting under correspondence or information
Yes.
as determined by staff.
Yeah,
Just that
yeah,
words,
that
or
works.
information
Yeah.
is determined by staff.
Sure,
Then that covers all. And you're gonna put on,
that's great.
all right, so
That's
seven,
determined by the corporate officer.
yeah, here you go, you got something else to do. And 7.6, well, there's a formatting issue with that, so I don't know what it is. I'll figure that one out. 8.1, anonymous correspondence. Acknowledge receipt of correspondence, including correspondence. Correspondence must include a name and civic address to be included in the agenda. Anonymous correspondence will not be included.
Yeah.
Which I could totally understand, but there could be some issues where somebody will send something in anonymously. And so what happens to anonymous correspondence, I guess is my question, which sort of isn't answered by that step.
It depends what it says.
Yeah.
Anonymous correspondence, if it's, say, a health and safety issue, it's referred to bylaw. But some anonymous correspondence is just pranks, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, again, staff will review, and if it's something that's Hope determines is serious, she'll bring it to my attention, and then we'll refer to the appropriate departments.
Yeah, so something more along the lines of anonymous correspondence will not be included in agendas, but may, depending on the circumstances, be referred to appropriate
Appropriate department, yeah.
department. So it just, otherwise it just sort of like
Yeah.
hanging there. And, what sort of circumstances and who decides?
Sorry, what was that?
She's just trying to find the list.
Oh, content for social media sites. So that's, except, postings by the municipality will consist of messages that reflect and support the municipality's vision, mission, da-da-da-da. Except in some circumstances, the municipality does not monitor, comment, post, or otherwise engage. So I guess, except in some circumstances is a pretty open-ended, who makes the decision? And by saying the municipality does not monitor, it means staff.
I don't understand the question.
Well, it says, except in some circumstances, the municipality does not monitor, comment, post, or otherwise engage on social media.
It may make
Or
sense to
other
drop
things
the
only.
initial phrase, just get rid of it, except in some
Mhm.
circumstances, and then have it read, the municipality does not ordinarily or normally monitor,
Yeah.
because that doesn't beg the
Yeah.
question as much as acceptance of
Yeah.
circumstances.
Yeah, okay, so just change it to say the municipality does not ordinarily, or,
Yeah.
yeah, generally or ordinarily, which would be better.
Generally.
Generally. And there was something in here that said the only people that should post are the staff, right?
Yep.
Yes, I saw that. Okay, that was my question.
All right, you wanna read the recommendation?
Thank you for that feedback.
Actually, just on the only people who should post are staff, this is silent on whether council members can or do or whatever when it comes to social media.
That's correct.
As individuals.
But that's on their own, no council member should be posting on the BIM social media as a BIM response.
No.
That's
No.
correct.
No, certainly not.
I believe Sophie only has staff, only have access to.
I move that council adopt the communicating with the public policy number 07002 as amended at the council meeting held July 8th, 2019.
Second to Rob, all
And
in
that picks
favor?
up the on-table amendments, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Maureen, 3.9.
Just in going through the minutes, when we were talking about the issues, the water issues, and potentially using Bowen's as a way of getting the word out about the water problems, at the Emergency Program Executive Committee meeting, sort of the conclusion was reached, no, that's not a good idea because it's not an emergency. And I wasn't sure I agreed with that conclusion. I mean, for the people who live in that area, if they do have access to Bowen's, I mean, it's not as if you're going to be
It's not a-
flooding them with
They were saying it
information.
wasn't an emergency because
It wasn't an immediate
they weren't
hazard,
out of water.
immediate risk.
And
No one was in danger.
Nobody was not gonna be able to turn the tap on and get some water.
And I mean, do we have criteria established for Bowen's that says only to be used in those extreme circumstances?
I don't think so. I wasn't at that meeting.
Well, I raised the issue of the time the tree came down across Miller's
Yeah.
and said, no, because they used that to tell the island, and they said, well, that was an emergency situation because people could not, in an emergency, get out of their houses or that kind of thing, so.
But I think it's going back to
So
what
there's a
Maureen said,
different,
where I don't think it's defined when an emergency is to use Bowen's. So I think the first step is, if we have this network, why wouldn't we use it for things of this nature?
well,
All right.
I was at the meeting too,
Yeah.
and the point is that if people get notifications, too many notifications that aren't an immediate risk to life or health, which is what the EMS program is set up for and what emergency, whatever it's called,
Emergency
ends.
notification.
Thank you, emergency notification system. Then what happens with these systems in other communities is that people start to opt out because they don't want notifications that aren't the earthquake, the life and death kind of alerts. And
Cry wolf.
yeah.
and that's what the idea of an emergency is immediate risk to life and health.
So had there been no water, they would have sent it out. Because that was a help. Yeah.
I think it would be useful to revisit that discussion and just pin down in.
We can think of that.
Yeah, and I mean, Bowen's has the ability to segment the announcements so that it would go to a specific area. I'm not talking about, daily updates, I'm just
No.
saying that, at one point, a message could have gone out directing people to access other information sources.
Because that's one of the issues we're facing right now, is not everybody is signed up in Blue Water and King Edward Bay and trying to push that
Get the message
information
out,
out.
yeah.
They're probably not in the ENS system either then.
Yeah.
Well, but there may be. I'll talk to Jen, just understanding what constitutes an emergency, and maybe, now the EPAC doesn't meet again, I think it just meets quarterly, doesn't it?
Yeah, it just meets quarterly, so if you
September.
talk to Jen,
Yeah.
she was
She was
defending
the
it,
one
I
that
was
acted.
defending it, and because I was remembering from our discussions, setting it up. And and just the interest at the, well, what was under discussion at that session was if there's a forest fire, you want everybody to be signed up and not to have opted out. And those immediate risks have a high priority if we ever have to use it. And I would encourage members of the press present to encourage everybody to sign up for the emergency notification system.
Here, here.
Because
And
the more
for
people
the
you
water
got it,
system notification.
and for the other kinds of alerts and notifications that we have, the more ways to get the word out, the better. But I think the question was this a vehicle that we wanted to risk the wear and tear on in order to use for things that were not immediate risk to life and health.
I think it's a question, I'll
For
talk,
Jen.
I'll talk to Jen, but I mean, one understanding what's our policy for using it, but I would argue along the lines of what Maureen did, where it's just focused on that specific segment of the community. And I mean, one of the feedback we did get when we did the on-island test was people being surprised by it. So I think in a way, it's showing that the system works as well. Anyways, I'll have a conversation with Jen about it and just kind of understand. Thank you.
But I got a feeling that people down in Blue Water, if you want to tell them about the water thing, that the ones wouldn't be on ends are the ones that are getting the information. That would just be my
Yeah, but it's also a great way to get people to sign up. Here's an example of why you should be on that system.
Okay, so that kind of wraps it up, except for question period. Want to step right up, or?
I have a bunch, sorry.
Okay.
So does this mean that we're not getting a path this summer?
Yes.
Not for
That is correct, so that's not happening. What are the feasibility issues? Can you-
Engineering.
Determined by the engineer, yeah.
We're going to have, if you haven't met Glenn.
Hi, Glenn.
Right back
Hi.
there.
Glenn, Glenn's our interim director of engineering and is with Urban Systems. And he will be reporting back to council likely October, maybe November, about the feasibility and looking at different options when it comes to the multi-use path, both the specific area and generally the multi-use path across the island.
So is that like within the existing contract with Urban Systems, or is that a new one?
Oh, well, Glenn is acting as our interim
So
director of
that's all
engineering,
part
that's
of
part
it.
of his role as our, yeah.
Part of it.
Don't scare me.
Yes, please don't.
And what does this mean for the grant?
Translate grant funding remains in place, and we're just waiting to hear back from the province about the Bike BC funding. But if I can also just underscore, this is not a cancellation, it's just a postponement while we rejig with our engineer looking at it. But council's still 100% behind the multi-use path project.
Is this redoing, I forget the name of that other consultant firm, but-
Transportation master plan?
No, the other,
Prius?
Prius, is this redoing what Prius did?
It's not redoing, but Glenn's acting as our engineer, so he's providing that oversight. Oversight.
Okay, and then thank you. And on a totally different note, who's downloading the app?
Yeah.
Yes.
I haven't yet.
Well,
Haven't yet?
I'm gonna go home and do it.
It's easy to do.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bronwyn.
How did it work on the ride?
On that happy note, we
How was the
will,
ride?
Oh, it was just a B-roll ride. They didn't have anything in it, but that's
A B-roll ride.
yeah, the TV guys had other big cameras.
Yeah.
I was the important person.
Yeah.
the one passenger.
Yeah, the passenger.
Move to adjourn?
To adjourn.
Thank you. Okay, does anybody want to break before we go back and finish up the closed?
Yeah, we're reconvening the closed meeting, so.
Yeah. I just want to, there's not much left on the closed.